Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at some truly fascinating source material to unravel one of the absolute most baffling paradoxes in all of global sports. We're going to explore some deep systemic flaws. But stick with me here, because exactly halfway through, we are going to reveal the single biggest mistake in Indian football history. It's a catastrophic moment that literally changed everything.
So we have to start with this staggering figure, 1.4 billion. Think about the sheer volume of human potential wrapped up in the population of India. If you just look at the math, you'd absolutely expect a nation this massive to naturally produce world-class athletes in almost every major global sport, right?
But then, we hit this number, 0. That is the exact amount of FIFA World Cup matches India has ever played. 0 appearances, 0 goals. It completely defies logic. You put 1.4 billion next to 0, and you immediately know there's a massive mystery hiding in that gap. The contrast is just unbelievable. I mean, you have nations like Uruguay who've actually lifted the World Cup trophy, or Croatia who routinely battle it out in the final stages. These are countries with populations smaller than a single neighborhood in Mumbai or Delhi, yet they consistently dominate the global stage, while India, a veritable continent of a country, just sits out every single tournament. So what gives? Are cricket and poor infrastructure to blame? Let's take a quick look at the modern symptoms of this problem. It's incredibly easy to point the finger at the modern era. The television boom created an absolute explosion for cricket, basically sucking all the oxygen and the sponsorship money out of the room. Meanwhile, football was left with glaring gaps in grassroots development, a severe lack of youth academies, and massive blind spots when it comes to identifying talent. The systemic divide is just stark when you compare India to successful Asian footballing nations. While India's academies are emerging, they're pretty fragmented. Compare that to places like Japan and South Korea, where coaching pathways are deeply integrated right into their public school systems. The big takeaway here? A billion people mean nothing without a machine to nurture them. Raw talent simply cannot overcome deeply structured developmental systems. But here is where the source material completely shifts our perspective. These systemic issues, the lack of academies, the absolute dominance of cricket, they're actually just modern symptoms of a much older, deeper wound. Football wasn't always an afterthought in India. Something happened that fractured the timeline entirely. Which brings us to the absolute core of our mystery. What is the biggest mistake in Indian football history? To find the answer, we have to travel back 75 years to the 1950 World Cup. In 1949, India actually qualified for Brazil. By early 1950, they were officially drawn to play Sweden, Italy, and Paraguay. They stood right on the doorstep of history. And then, just weeks before kickoff, they shockingly withdrew. They qualified, and then they literally just walked away. Now, if you know your sports folklore, you've probably heard the crazy rumor. Did FIFA ban them because the Indian players insisted on playing barefoot? It's a wildly exotic story, right? These noble traditionalists clashing with a rigid global governing body. Well, looking at the historical consensus in our sources, historians have completely squashed the barefoot myth. The truth isn't romantic at all. It was deeply bureaucratic, fundamentally frustrating, and honestly, completely avoidable. The real reasons came down to a massive administrative miscalculation. Taking a team all the way to Brazil in 1950 involved immense travel costs and absolute logistical nightmares. But the wildest part? The administrators at the time simply didn't think the World Cup was a big deal. They actually prioritized the upcoming Olympics instead. They literally chose not to go. What makes this 1950 withdrawal the absolute biggest mistake in their sporting history is what the team actually went on to achieve immediately after. This was the dawn of India's lost golden generation. These guys were not a team of amateurs who would have been embarrassed in Brazil. Under their legendary manager, Syed Abdul Rahim, they won the Asian Games gold in '51. In '56, they reached the semifinals at the Melbourne Olympics, which is an unbelievable feat. They proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that they had the raw talent to compete globally during the 50s and 60s. It creates this haunting what-if scenario. Imagine the alternate history, building on the exposure and global momentum of playing in a football-crazy Brazil. Instead, we got the reality we know today: decades of decline, missed opportunities, and the complete cultural takeover of cricket. If they had just boarded that boat to Brazil, the entire trajectory of Indian sports might be completely different today. So,
Knowing all of this historical baggage, the massive question remains today. Can India ever break the curse?
The good news is they definitely aren't sitting still. Concrete steps are finally being taken to rebuild the infrastructure from the ground up. The launch of the Indian Super League is professionalizing the domestic game. We're seeing real structural governance reforms, and youth academies are desperately expanding across the states. Plus, modern heroes from the Sunil Chhetari era are giving kids someone to finally emulate on the pitch. But we have to be realistic here. The optimism of a billion-person market and growing domestic interest is constantly fighting against fierce competition. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and Saudi Arabia are decades ahead. India isn't just trying to build a system, they're playing a 75-year game of catch-up against nations that never stopped running. Going through the source material for this explainer really leaves us with a profound realization about the butterfly effect. 75 years ago, India stood on the doorstep of history and chose not to walk through. The question is no longer why they missed it back then. The question is, will this massive billion-person effort finally be enough to correct the biggest mistake in their history? So, what do you think? Will we actually see India at a World Cup in our lifetime?